Hi, I'm Bella. I'm the president of Savage Journal, UCL's Arts and Culture magazine, and we are here today with Caroline Issa. She's the fashion director of Tank and Because, and we have Kian Trainer, who is the deputy editor at Huck Magazine. We're going to be talking about creative industries, how to break into them, and specifically creative journalism. So, you both had quite different routes into journalism. Kian, yours was more straightforward, more in line with what a lot of our members are planning to do. Caroline, you kind of took a slight detour, came in a bit later. Do you want to just in turn walk us through how you got to where you are today and any kind of highlights along the way?
Do you want to start?
No, you go ahead.
Oh, great. I have a very untraditional route into publishing. So I went to university in Philadelphia. I went to Penn, and I went to the Wharton School, which is an undergraduate business school. And I actually studied business. And when I graduated, I moved to San Francisco, and I became a management consultant. And I lived in the States for a year, I lived in Singapore for a year, and then I got moved to London. And it was in London that I actually met the founders of this little kind of 4-year-old, very niche, very cool magazine called Tank. And it was a few months after spending some time with them, kind of helping them out a little bit on the business side, that I actually quit and gave up my very stable, well-paying job, much to my parents' chagrin, and joined Tank as a publisher. And so that was 15 years ago, and I'll be celebrating 16 years next year.
Amazing. And Kian?
So I studied English and philosophy at university, and then I did a master's in English. And the whole time I didn't know what I wanted to do, which is something from speaking to undergraduates, it's pretty common. And writing was the only thing that I was kind of half decent at. So I was really passionate about music as well. So I started a website. I kind of learned or practiced my writing on that every day for about a year. And that's when I started approaching different publications. And then after doing that for about a year or two, I moved to London from Dublin. And I did the same again, and except no one was answering my emails, so I ended up studying journalism for a year at City University. And from there, I ended up working at a music magazine for a couple of years, and then I went back to Ireland to work at the Irish Times for a few years. Then I came back to London 2 years ago. I've been at Huck ever since.
Amazing. So what would you say, Kian having done one and Caroline having not, what would you say the pros and cons of a postgrad degree in something like journalism? Like, how important is formal education for a creative career?
Do you want to start?
Well, I feel like I've done both, because when I started I didn't have that qualification, and in Ireland it was okay. I mean, I got my foot in the door in a couple of places just from pestering people. And then when I moved over here, I just could not get a response from anyone. I wanted to do internships, and no one would even take me. It was that difficult. I guess my experience wasn't translating from a different country, or maybe I was just sending bad emails.
Possible.
But then when I did it, it did tighten up my skills a lot, and I learned stuff outside of my interest space, and the legal stuff, politics, court reporting, all things that I may not use now, but it was really interesting and useful to have. And then I could get internships via doing that course at my dream publication. So, but from the perspective of a commissioning editor, I don't think it matters that much. I'm thinking more about the strength of your idea, and whether you can write. And it doesn't matter to me if you've got a degree in journalism or not.
I think I would add to that. I think I would completely agree with you, and I think, obviously from someone who never did a postgraduate degree, in fact, I'm much more open to talking to potential staff, to work experience people who don't have a traditional background in either publishing or the creative, in the arts. But like anything, I think it definitely helps on your CV. It kind of gives you instant credibility, if anything. And it definitely, it doesn't hurt you. It certainly helps you. It helps you get into certain doors. I think some people really look for kind of post-grad qualifications. But I think ultimately, absolutely, is what you said. I think, tone of voice, have you written, where have you written, where do I see that? All of that kind of comes up to the forefront. And I think postgrad will help you develop that. So it's definitely useful. Yeah. But I don't think it's an absolute.
So the alternative, and actually something that a lot of people end up doing as well as a postgrad in journalism, is interning. What do you think about internships, specifically unpaid internships? Have you got any kind of horror stories, any advice for people doing them? Anyone wants to jump in first?
Well, I mean, I've done them, so that's how essentially how I started off, and a lot of the people I worked with started off the same way. So the editor-in-chief of Huck Magazine started as an intern 11 years ago, and staff that we've had started the same way. So we've recently hired people who came from internships elsewhere. So there is a huge value in the experience that you can gain. I think the negative side of it is that it's only for people who can afford to do an internship. So the consequence of that is you're losing a lot of diversity and voices, that people who can afford to do an internship based on like expenses or nothing for weeks at a time.
I think, we have always looked first to our work experience people when we're looking to hire. So if a position opens up, I think for us it's easier to go to a known quantity rather to an unknown quantity. But I agree, I think it's an incredibly difficult thing, and I think any place that asks you to do an unpaid internship for more than, anything between 1 to 3 months, you have to really put your foot down, and also you have to really be in a position to be able to afford it, and it's really difficult. But I do think it's invaluable, and most times I would say you need at least a month to actually get any value out of a work experience placement, and vice versa. But it's really helpful, and what we're trying to do is structure ours much more than kind of what we did a decade ago. And also we're starting to work with a lot of schools that do year-long work placements that actually go towards credit for school. So we are looking now to really implement a much more structured kind of work placement program that actually we work through the universities to do. So it's a tricky one, but I absolutely think that it can benefit both parties. It just, depends how you can actually get by doing it.
A couple of really interesting things came out of that. So you said that you're starting to develop schemes with universities. I'm assuming that's with universities where the courses are specifically geared towards publishing or creative journalism, which could again be seen as maybe closing a door to someone who is coming from a more traditional degree. Why have you decided to do that?
Well, they're also structured in that way, so it becomes, a process that is beneficial for both. I'm not against, I worked for like 6 months kind of on the side of my actual job on weekends and nighttime, anytime I actually could, to spend time with the business that I was about to join when I first started at Tank. So in a way, I guess it was a bit of an internship. But, for those who aren't necessarily on those courses, I think, I've met lawyers, I've met accountants who are desperately interested in coming into the publishing side of business or fashion, whatever it is, and who kind of try to come on weekend shoots and kind of just understand a little bit more about the business that we're in. And I think that's a way, and I'm really open to that, because I understand how hard it is to get your foot in the door. It can't happen with everybody, obviously, but I think right time, right place, right email,
right.
then, there's a huge chance for that to happen.
That's another thing that I wanted to mention. When I'm explaining how internships work to undergraduates, because most of them have no idea. They just think, I'll do this, and then they'll give me a job. There's two really big factors, and one is the timing. So there's got to be an opening coming up, or they're going to expand or something, because it's not just a case of if you're good, you'll get a job. If you're really good and an opening comes up down the line, you'll be at the top of the queue probably, I would say. The other thing is whether it's a good fit. So you might be a fan of a publication and do an internship there, and once you get in there, it's not like what you thought. The people are not like what you thought, or you might be like, I'm home. This is me, and so that you can't kind of predict that.
Yeah.
So when you're applying for internships, both those things you don't know until you're actually in there.
And kind of bringing it back round to what you were both saying earlier. Obviously, internships can be invaluable in terms of the experience that they offer you. But like you said, only so many people can afford to do them for a prolonged period of time. At what point, as a young creative, do you put your foot down and say, actually, no, I value my work. You need to value my work too. I have kind of enough experience now and I feel that I should be getting paid. At what point do you say that, and how do you negotiate it in a way that's kind of fair and right for both parties?
I mean, I think it depends on the experience that you have and whether that is transparent and comes through enough such that you could put yourself into a negotiating position and, say that I have done XYZ and therefore I expect, a word rate of X, or, can my time be compensated to X amount a week? I think if you've had zero experience, it would be sort of presumptuous, because I think the, work of place probably is helping to feed you with a lot of knowledge of how a professional, workspace actually works. But if you've, really slogged through and worked at different publications and have seen a variety of roles and responsibilities through, then I think, you need to have self-worth and definitely ask. And if you don't ask, you don't get. If you do ask and you don't get, you then are put in a position where you can make a decision whether or not you want to actually spend that time learning, creating, and developing or not. So I think, and I don't know, there's no rule of thumb, like, is it 6 months, is it 2 months, is it a year? I can't tell you.
My paper.
Oh.
Yeah, so just kind of play it by the situation and how you feel you're progressing and how other people are responding to your work as well, I suppose.
No, definitely. And I think you have to just gauge whether or not you think your potential commissioner, employer, whatever it is, have you shown them or written for them before? Where along that process are you in terms of delivering added value, I guess? And you have to be realistic about, therefore, kind of what you're asking for. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would always say, cause my own approach to doing internships was to make myself indispensable in the hope that I was.
Yeah.
And I think if you do that, I mean, it is a sensitive conversation to have, and there are nuances. Because not always the editor who is responsible for hiring. There's usually a business behind it, and they have people who look after that kind of thing. But if you make yourself indispensable as best you can, and it is a good fit, once you say, well, I'm thinking of going here, I think of doing this because I need to make an income. That's when, if it is a good fit and they really care about you, they'll try and stop you from leaving.
Yeah. And in terms of being a good intern and making yourself indispensable, do you have any tips, any little kind of habits that past interns have had, or that you had as an intern, Kian, that really kind of piqued your interest and made you think that person's got something? Or
for me, it's if you're bringing me solutions and not problems, I like you. Or you're bringing me a problem, but you have the solution. Those kind of people really stand out to me. And I think anybody who's willing to do pretty much anything, within reason, obviously, but I think in terms of kind of role and, not necessarily kind of, I only work in the fashion department, I'm only on text, I'm only on editing, I'm only on film, but actually if there's a shoot happening and you see someone who needs a pair of hands, that you're really flexible. So I guess flexibility, I think curiosity, and I think absolutely being a problem solver rather than just coming with problems. That's for me.
Those are all good things. I would say ideas. If you know the publication, sounds like a really obvious thing, but some interns just have a look at the website before they came in to start their internship, and so it does make a huge difference if they have been reading it for a while, and they have ideas that fit within that. And other than that, I think sometimes you can just tell when someone has a real hunger and a drive to do the work and be flexible and make themselves indispensable, I guess.
Cool. You talked about kind of being in the right place at the right time, sending the right email at the right moment. How important is networking? Because this is something that, we kind of asked our members what they wanted to ask you, and it's something that they find quite daunting. So, how important is it, and do you have any tips for how to network effectively?
I mean, that's how I met you.
Yeah, that's true.
I was talking on another panel, and you came up to me, and we exchanged emails, and now I'm here.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be ballsy. I think you have to put yourself in situations where you're going to meet people in the industry that you want to work in, and I think you have to, be proactive about contacting them. It doesn't mean that everyone is going to contact you back, but I think if you are professional and interesting and show a passion for something, I think most people are kind of willing to meet for a tea or, come show you the office and, but I definitely think you have to put yourself out there for sure. And through any resource. You never know, maybe like your baker's daughter is the professor or an editor at a fashion magazine. You just never know.
Yeah, small world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely good to ask around and see if there are any connections that you didn't realise were there. It's also good if there's a publication that you really want to write for, to ask an editor there to meet you for coffee. And a lot of times they will be flattered that you're interested and willing to give you some advice, and then they have a face to put to the name, and that can help. But I still think ideas is the biggest thing, and I'm an introvert, so I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I could not network to save my life. So it's not necessary. I think it's better to make an impact when you're pitching, rather than, do you remember me? Because they might feel responsible for, obliged to respond to your email, but that's not necessarily going to lead to a commission,
Okay. Have there been any kind of people that you've met along the way in your careers? Anyone who's acted as a sort of mentor to you? I don't know, anyone who stands out?
I mean, yes, my path to today is littered with mentors. But my mentors kind of come from all different aspects of this business, to other editors-in-chief of kind of larger corporate magazines, to publishers, to CEOs of fashion brands. I love learning about the kind of 360 of the business that we publish in, whether that's fashion or literature or film and art. And so I really try to seek people through each of those disciplines to learn as much as I can. Whether or not I have like one full-time mentor, not really, but I definitely tap into my own network and have like regular touch points and just try to understand like what they're facing in their kind of part of the industry. And that's, I guess, how I keep learning, I guess. What about you?
I said there was two that comes to mind. One was a friend of mine who studied journalism but ended up becoming a psychologist. And when I started out, I would send him every article I wrote to proofread.
Wow. And
looking back, I think, oh my God, what a good friend. But he would come back with like constructive criticism and like just questions, which is I think that this is good advice for anyone. Just get other people to read your work. Yeah. He did that for so long that eventually I stopped. I didn't need him anymore, but that was hugely helpful in like learning to edit my own work. Yeah. Another one, when I came over here and I ended up working at a music magazine, the editor was called Phil Hebblethwaite, and I was working very closely with him because it was basically him in an attic with one or two other people, and he delivered the magazine all around the country himself. It's like 60,000 circulation. He did it all himself, so working really closely with him, I just soaked up so much stuff that you can't learn at a journalism course.
Yeah.
A lot of industry stuff and how the record business works and the PR industry, things that they don't teach in classes in journalism. I really soaked that up from him.
Yeah. No, I think that can definitely be really, really helpful. Kind of zooming out a bit, what do you think are the biggest challenges that young journalists and young creatives are facing today? Big question.
Big question.
I think it is hard to make a living from this, and but they have been saying that the industry is over for a long time. So when I studied journalism, it was the same month that the financial crisis hit, and so our college lecturer says, "Sorry guys, none of you are getting jobs." So and people, I keep hearing similar things in the years since, and somehow, like the best ones do find a way to make it. And I don't think it's all doom and gloom. There are opportunities out there, but you just have to be more and more creative about balancing income streams and finding other revenue, because just like creative journalism by itself just tends not to pay very well. So it is tough to try and figure out a way to make that work before you give up, because that can happen.
So how do you manage that? How do you have kind of multiple projects? I know a lot of kind of artists and people that I've heard speak have spoken about doing, their creative work, which is what you'll see on their portfolio, and then having the commercial stuff that just happens behind the scenes, and they'll never really show it to anybody, but it pays their rent, essentially. How do you manage the multiple projects and multiple income streams?
Well, it's something, I work with a lot of photographers, and that is something that they will do, because commercial, that side of the industry can pay so much more money. And I think it's getting less stigmatized. I don't think it's quite as embarrassing or touchy to do that anymore. I mean, I think that is a huge change in the last couple of years. And there is more of a blending of editorial and commercial projects, and you can't always tell what they are. So there's some interesting things going on there. But it's just, it's part of the hustle. You have to find ways to keep your head afloat. I mean, I had a time where I was freelancing, and I was doing stuff that wasn't my thing, but I had to do it in order to
kind of bread and butter stuff.
In order to keep going. And eventually, I didn't need that anymore, and I, got back into an editorial position. So it is hard, but you do have to be really, really enterprising about, like, how can I make this work?
I mean, it's I went in quite quickly into owning part of a magazine at quite a young age, and I guess I just worked my ass off to make sure that as an independent publisher we could survive. But on the other hand, what I also did was I actually kind of formalized a creative agency side, which was very commercial, which was about working with brands who loved our art direction or our writers or the content that we were creating, to create ad campaigns or content or custom publishing magazines. And, at Tank, for us, it's really important. For me, it's really important that our art directors, our writers are also working on the commercial work, because I don't think commercial is a dirty thing. I think it's incredibly important that artists also understand that you have to sell stuff in order to survive and create the things that you love. And, it's interesting. I think, we turn 20 next year, and I've actually never been more optimistic about independent publishing than I am today. And I did not think I'd be saying that 5 years ago, when we were all sitting in a corner going, oh my God, the web is going to destroy us. And actually, it's so much more important today to be incredibly great and, storytellers, and storytellers that are creating really substantial pieces of content. And I think as a creative and as a young creative, I think you have to strive to really have an incredible point of view that people, really gravitate towards. Because I think without a really clear point of view and tone of voice, words are, AI is going to start writing press releases, so unless you have a fantastic way of expressing yourself that is so unique to you that people will be desperately wanting to read, see, watch, whatever that is, that's when you should be nervous.
And I mean, you've kind of touched on this already, but where do you see the magazine industry going in the next kind of 5 to 10 years? Like, obviously there was the big scare of journalists won't have jobs anymore and everything's going to be online, and actually both of your publications produce beautiful print editions, which it seems that there's still a demand for, because Huck was completely sold out in Chemistry and Waterstones, and I had to chase it across Fitzrovia. But where do you see it going?
Where do you see it going?
I don't know. I mean, it's
deflecting.
It is tough to predict, but I mean, I think on the web now, like, how do you stand out? There's so much journalism and just taking stories from elsewhere and repackaging them. So if you go against the flow of that and produce original content, some of which is long form, visual based, rather than like just taking stock photos or taking someone else's photos, I mean, that in itself is going to make you stand out. And there is a demand for that. If you produce quality work, people will find you, and the internet can actually help people find you. So we have people in all over the world ordering our magazine online because they can't get it in their local place in Alaska or wherever. And there is a demand for stuff that is like a lot of blood, sweat and tears have gone into.
I feel very optimistic for independent titles. I think, you know, publications that are lean and can react quickly, but also who really are able to take the time to tell great stories with meaning and in original ways. And I actually think that digital is such an incredible thing to leverage for independent publications, actually, in a way that now actually we can amplify the content that we labor over creating in our print magazines in such amazing ways. And, you know, I do think that on the spectrum of content publishers, I think kind of that substance, collectability, meaningful, and really original, that is not inclusive of aggregation or kind of rehashing press releases. And then digital, like those two areas, I think I feel very kind of excited by. Yeah. I think it's really tough for when you have huge overheads and when you are trying to react, but you don't have the time to kind of create meaningful things, or you are too late when you're kind of publishing a piece of news and it's already been released, you know, via Twitter. So I actually feel very optimistic, but who knows? Who knows? It's great when you hear stats like Vanity Fair, you know, doubling subscriptions, Private Eye, The Intercept, you know, really making, you know, substantial ways around subscription model for information that you just can't find anywhere else. Yeah. So I think there's really a lot of different models, but I do think that any content creator that is making meaningful content is in a really good place.
Yeah, that's really reassuring.
I know.
Kind of building on that, as a journalist, so kind of outside of the magazines that you work for, as a journalist, as an individual, how important is it to cultivate an online personal brand or like a following? How can that help or hinder what you do?
Well, I think I'm biased. I would say it would help. You know, I mean, I think I have been swept into that bit of the business in kind of the fashion bit where, you know, Instagram and building up your Instagram page and
constantly referred to as a street style favorite.
Yes. But I actually think when I meet young journalists, you know, I'm always like, okay, where can I read your writing? The writing that hasn't been commissioned by other people, but the writing that kind of really represents your tone of voice. And if they have their own blog, their own website where they've kind of created, or even visually through Instagram or whatever it is, it gives me a very quick sense of what they represent as a writer or as an artist or as a creative person. So I think, you know, I think it's incredibly helpful, because you have to very quickly now kind of tell, you know, what are your brand values? What do you stand for? What kind of things do you want to write about? You know, when I started thinking about commissioning stuff, I'm like, well, who wants to write about, you know, 1980s designers specifically, like, and I can think of that writer because she has completely branded herself as to sort of more archive pieces, historian, you know. So I think it's really important.
I think it is important in certain situations. So if you're going to write opinion pieces, for instance, I definitely know, I've seen editors look at people's following to see what kind of audience they've already developed. And for small to mid-range publications, they want writers who already have a built-in following and can just tweet out the link once it's live, and you're guaranteed to get traffic. So that kind of scenario is important. I think for any hiring manager probably will look at your social media just to get a sense of what your interests are and what you're saying online. So it's always sensible to keep that in mind. But I don't think it's necessarily the be all and end all. If that's not your space, then I wouldn't worry too much about it. But one thing that is becoming increasingly important is you need to be savvy in social media when you come into an editorial position. So it's not just about sharing stuff, it's about analytics and where you can seed content and that kind of stuff. There is a real dearth of talent out there who are journalistically minded at the moment. So if you can find a way to learn about that and write as well, you will be in such a good place.
Snapped up.
Sticking to the online theme, I think with the development of, emails are on your phone now, there's social media messaging for work, things like Slack. It can feel quite pervasive and people can technically get hold of you 24/7.
Yes.
How do you maintain a work-life balance when that's the case? I'm thinking especially working as a freelancer, people feel like you're outside of normal working hours anyway, is the sense that I get. And I've had people contact me at midnight expecting things to be done by 8 a.m. and I'm just asleep. How do you kind of manage that?
I think it's a very, I think as a society we're expecting everything quickly.
Yeah.
But I think you have to, put your own boundaries and define your boundaries. And if you're working with a new client, you explain, saying, if you email me at midnight, I might not get back to you until noon the next day potentially. But it is an automatic assumption now that you will read emails any time of the day. But I think if you put those clear boundaries down, and you express them and you're transparent about them, then people will choose or choose not to work with you with those. But you have to express them in order for people to know them. Yeah. And you have to personally set your own boundaries. Don't check emails over the weekend or on holiday or whatever it is that you do.
Right. That's what I do. So I don't have any alerts set up on my phone. So we have Slack at work, but I'm not getting it on my phone. So I need to go and look at my emails.
Yeah,
but
that seems a healthier.
Something's not gonna buzz up, and I put my phone on silent during the night, and I meditate for half an hour in the morning and half an hour in the evening, which helps decompress things a bit. So I've got my boundaries down, but I end up wanting to check my emails a lot of the time. So I got to keep myself in check, basically.
Yeah, I think it does seem there's a lot of self-discipline.
Yeah, definitely,
involved.
Especially today. Yeah, because it's so easy. I mean, what was the statistic like? We open up Instagram like over 100 times a day or something, and that is completely realistic.
Yeah.
And therefore, for you to stop yourself to do that, you have to have such self-discipline today.
Yeah,
it's great that
you
meditate.
So mindless as well.
It's so mindless.
Like, you find
yourself like that finger fatigue.
Totally. You're just not
and that's the thing. There's such copious amounts of information being thrown at us that you have to make it now. I think we're all making more conscious decisions around what we're consuming information wise.
Yeah. Just kind of concluding things then. Do you have any more general advice or tips that you think people might find useful? Any kind of nuggets of wisdom you want to share?
I do have one, and it's completely obvious, but it's worth saying, is that read as much as you can. So when I'm screening interns for who might be a good fit for us, I always ask, what do you read? Where do you get your news? And a lot of the time they don't know what to say because they're not reading. So you really do, if you want to be a good writer, you have to read all the time and read widely. It makes such a difference. And I think when I started out, I wanted to be a music journalist, and I didn't really spend enough time going through the publications and just dissecting them and saying what made a good article. I just went, oh, that's a cool magazine, I'll try and write for them. And I think that does happen a lot. It's like you need to read first and understand where your voice is going to fit within that and what form it should take, and it helps you to understand what's good storytelling, because you can't just pick it up necessarily straight away.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice.
I guess my piece of advice, I think that's great advice, and I would add to that if you are applying for work experience or a job, you would think this would happen more often, but it doesn't. I would absolutely say, make sure that your cover letter is extremely explicit as to why you want to work at the publication that you're applying for. What was the last great story you read, or what is it about XYZ magazine that you are, passionately excited to work for? Why? Just why? I get so many cold emails, but it's like, "Dear Sir," you're just like, you just emailed me, that's the one thing. That's a straight delete. And then if it's a generic cover letter, that's a second delete, and I take the time to read almost everything that comes into my inbox, but I think if you make it personal, if you make it specific, that's just even one foot in the door. And it doesn't happen as often as you would think. So that's my key advice.
That's a
personalize
great point,
it.
And another thing with learning to be a better writer, you're basically have to learn to consider someone else's perspective who might not be interested in this, who might not have the time to read this. So you're trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and that applies to pitching. So put yourself in the shoes of someone who has thousands of email coming at them every day from PRs, from writers, from photographers, and they all want something, and they all feel entitled to get it, and they can't all get a reply. So just think, how am I going to get this person's attention, and how am I going to get to the point and stick out? Because I think most people do just copy and paste stuff, or send out the same email to everyone without changing anything, and just hoping it'll lead to something. And I just think, a lot of experienced freelancers say you should spend as much time developing the pitch as the article itself, which might sound quite extreme, but if it's the first time you're pitching to someone, then it's absolutely worth doing.
All very, very good advice. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today, both of you. Thank you for joining us and learning all about breaking into creative journalism with Caroline and Kian. You can read Savage online at www.savageonline.co.uk, and you can pick up the latest copies of Huck and Tank, which are here and very, very beautiful, in all good bookshops and magazine vendors. Thanks for watching.